I'm based at Tufts University and I work at the A&H Academy Research Communities Initiative. I'm so glad to have everyone joining us today. We have two separate research communities. We have this one, which is focused on food supply loss and waste, and we have another one which focuses on food access and demand for healthy diets. So between the two of them, we hope to cover most of, if not all, of the food system aspects. Um, and for those of you who don't know too much about the Research Communities Initiative, we've basically organized these as a way for people who are interested in similar topics to come together and discuss ongoing research, research that's just completed, or things that are in the sort of ideation phase, and to be able to discuss with experts, to be able to discuss your own ideas, and compare and contrast experiences across different places, across different parts of the research process. Um, if you'd like to present at another upcoming event, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, and that's researchcommunities@tufts.edu. All we ask is that you have a topic in mind, and then that you save half of the time, which is 30 minutes, for a question and answer. And we really encourage everyone to join as they're able. So today's session will include a presentation from Erin on El Nino, and then we'll open up to questions and answers. But as she said previously, feel free to ask questions throughout. You can put them in the chat if you can't um, unmute yourself, but feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video if you're able. Um, I'll put the agenda in the chat and then also my email there as well. But now, Erin, feel free to get started. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, would people mind to introduce themselves in the chat? We are a small group, so I'd love to get to know who you are and like why you're here. I can put this is who I am. And if people would mind just dropping who they are in the chat. And so I do have a PowerPoint, but I would be welcome people to just stop me and interrupt with questions throughout the PowerPoint, and then we could have a Q&A at the end about El Nino. And I'd love to know, like, why are you here? What are you interested in? Learning about El Nino or discussing, because I think it's already been dominating the news, frankly, globally. Um, so with that said, here I will show the slides I have, partially because I think they're good for, like, it's easier to understand El Nino when you're looking at a lot of maps, frankly. Um, and then we can discuss. So right now, there's a lot of hype about this being a monster El Nino event, right? And I'm sure you've seen this. There are Godzilla El Nino graphics going around. And I can talk a little bit, actually, if you're interested in the science behind this, about maybe why this is the case. But here, these are three newspapers across Africa. I think I took one from Kenya, one from Zimbabwe, and one from South Africa. And here are some of the headlines that we're seeing about El Nino. What I think is certainly clear is that if you live in a region that is affected by El Nino, you probably have already heard that it's coming, and you have probably already thought about this. Um, the news is definitely getting it out there. And I'm curious, I don't know if people, I mean, if what people's experience has been and what you're finding in the news, and if you're finding it helpful or not helpful. Um, feel free to, yeah, feel free to comment as we go. So what I thought I would do is talk you a little bit through the science behind it. What is El Nino and why is it happening and why does it look like this? And we could talk a little bit later if you're interested in the nitty gritty of why it looks like a Godzilla and maybe why that might be a little bit misleading, but we can get there in a sec. One thing I do want to flag is that right now there is an Africa Climate Outlook Forum, a Pan Africa Climate Outlook Forum happening. And it's actually happening in Zambia right now this week. And so some of the best climate scientists across Africa are there. They're meeting and they're going to be issuing guidance and information. I would expect it to come out next week. So if I were you, I would follow these people for some up-to-date, useful guidance that should come out very soon. Ahmad is maybe, your easiest sort of Pan-African group that tries to make all of this happen. But then there are, of course, also regional groups that will have their own regional climate outlook forums. So I'm going to provide a big, sort of overview today from like a 40,000 foot level. but there will be regional and continental advisories coming out, and national advisories, of course, too, that will be much more authoritative in the coming months. Okay, so how does El Nino work? I I assume many of you have sort of seen graphics like this before, but in a normal year, the trade winds in the Pacific Ocean push water this way. And during a La Nina event, that actually gets even stronger. So warm water at the top of the ocean gets pushed over towards the maritime continent, like Indonesia, etc. And it's a lot cooler over here, like off the coast of Peru. In an El Nino event, those winds weaken and the warm water sloshes back across the world towards the Americas. And this is what causes an El Nino event. I mean, this is what we detect. We can see this happening. And I know that seems like it's like not, maybe not a big deal. Why should this be such a big deal? It's a big deal because the Pacific Ocean is enormous. The Pacific Ocean covers a huge portion of our planet. So if you imagine that this is a bathtub and you have some water that's sloshing from one end of the bathtub to the other, in a regular bathtub, that takes, maybe 1 second to happen. But in the Pacific Ocean, this takes months and months and months to happen and then to unhappen. Because we were talking about so like the entire planet's worth of water moving, across half the planet. So this is the basic phenomenon. I mean, it's not super complicated and it's very, very obvious when it's happening because the water is moving and the water is hot and we can detect this very easily with temperature, basically. And then we can also detect, so it wouldn't really matter if the ocean water moved around. Why does that matter to the rest of the world? Well, because that also then changes rainfall patterns. So we can detect then how the winds are changing in response to a really different ocean, right? So warmer water causes air to rise, causes rain to happen. So this change in the winds sets off wind pattern changes and rainfall pattern changes all over the world. So this is the root of what is happening, and this is why we can predict it so well, is because as we see this water moving, then we know we've seen what happens in the past, and we can predict what kind of weather patterns result from this. Every El Nino is a little bit different, but because we have experienced this so many times, we have a good sense of what El Ninos tend to look like. El Ninos are normal things. This is like a normal climate phenomenon that just happens approximately once every 4 years. So on average, in your lifetime, approximately every 4 years, we're gonna, we're in every 20 years, you're gonna have 5 of these kind of thing. And it's just very normal. You get this like slight weakening of the winds, you get this sloshing of the water, and then eventually the winds fix themselves and the water goes back. And that's a normal year. And then some years we have extra strong winds pushing extra more water this way, and that's a La Nina year, and we tend to get opposite effects. This is a normal climate oscillation. What does that mean for the rest of the world? Here's an easy map of the kinds of impacts you would expect in different places at different times. So here you can see that when the warm water moves this way towards Peru, you get rain, right? So the green is wetter. So this is like the epicenter of the El Nino event, and this is where we're going to see lots and lots of more rain. We often will see floods in this northern part of Peru and southern Ecuador. We'll see horrible flash floods during El Nino years, and people there know that they should be preparing for this. We'll see drought, right? So you're pulling the hot water and the rain away from Indonesia. All of a sudden, Indonesia sees drought during an El Nino year. And then you get all these knock-on effects around the rest of the world. El Nino is strongest around Christmas. And so the Peruvians actually named it. That's why it's called El Nino, is because like the biggest impacts are happening, December, January. And so the Peruvians called it El Nino, for the Christ child. And that's why we call it that for the rest of the world. But you can see that not everywhere gets the same impacts at the same time, right? So, you'll see that this is labeled with when people would expect to see certain impacts. And so if we're going to talk a bit more about Africa in this webinar, but one of the reasons why the Sahel sees the impact in July to September is because that's when the rainy season in the Sahel is happening. And so we see in East Africa, it's the October, November, December rainfall that tends to be most impacted by El Nino. And in Southern Africa, it's really the entire rainy season, because their entire rainy season coincides with the peak of the El Nino event. It looks a little bit different in South Asia and other places. For those of us living in the United States, we tend to see wet in the southern parts of the United States and dry in Hawaii. And so I once had a classmate many years ago who was saying that people should plan their vacation based on El Nino between Hawaii and Florida, because those two are inversely related when it comes to El Nino events or La Nina events. These effects, however, the strength of the impact in the United States is not as strong as how strong the impact would be here in like the Philippines, for example, where it's a lot closer and a lot, more affected by the El Nino event. Okay, so what's going to happen this year? Here are the forecasts. So because El Nino is this big, bulky, slow-moving thing, it doesn't really tell us very much about day-to-day weather. What we can do is see this big, slow-moving changes to rainfall thing happening. So when we make forecasts, we tend to make forecasts for 3-month periods at a time. So this forecast is for May, June, July, August, June, July, August, September, etc. So that's what these mean down here. So you can see that this is a NOAA chart. You can see that we are expecting to have, in June, July, August, those 3 months should see at least a weak El Nino. And they're expecting that by Christmas, if we're looking at sort of that peak time around Christmas, there is a high chance that we're going to see what would be considered a very strong El Nino. And a very strong El Nino does not necessarily mean very strong impacts, but it does tend to mean that impacts are more likely to happen. I mean, you're essentially creating a bigger perturbation. So it doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get wet weather in Florida, for example, or floods in East Africa. But it does, sort of strengthen that likelihood. If we want to get into some details later, you can see that there are 2 ways that we forecast this. One is some models are statistical. This is this green line right here. The dark green line is the average of our statistical models. And this is like how strong the El Nino could be. So here you can see peak again around Christmas. The models would peak it around that time. And we have statistical models in green that basically just say, historically, when we see these temperatures, we see these kinds of impacts. And we have dynamical models that essentially model how the atmosphere moves around and interacts, like our regular weather forecasts. And they're both tending to agree with the dynamical models, putting it at a little bit of a stronger event. All right, so what does that mean? So this is sort of like what normally happens during El Nino events. These are typical impacts, but we do have forecasts from these models about what this El Nino could mean this year for our world. So I'm going to show you some of those forecasts right now. And again, I would refer you also to ACMAD and the other authoritative sources as they prepare their products in the coming months. So this is an American product that's using a lot of different models, and they average together the model probabilities. And so this is for temperature. And I'm only going to show you one temperature plot because basically the answer for temperature is that most places are going to be warmer. They are forecasting above normal temperatures in the next few months. This is pretty consistent going forward. So that's something to think about and be aware of. Here are some of their precipitation forecasts. So this is the upcoming season. We are in June, so this is the closest forecast they're producing, which is for July, August, September. And so you can see here, there is some chance of this dry Sahel, but it's not a very strong signal right now. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then as we get a little bit later in the year, August, September, October, you can start to see that wet signal appear in East Africa. September, October, November, it appears with a lot more confidence. The models are very confident that it's likely to be above normal rainfall in East Africa. This is sort of the entire October, November, December rainy season for East Africa. So in bimodal areas that have an OND rainy season, they're really expecting wet over East Africa. And we're starting to get into the rainy season for Southern Africa here right now. And you're going to see that there are high probabilities of dryness and drought. And that's it. The forecasts don't go past December right now. That's kind of far out anyway for us, like 6 months. Um, but you can see that Southern Africa is already thinking about drought. And you can see here for context here, you see again this wet signal again off the coast of Peru and Ecuador, dry in parts of South America. Here's our wet southern US signal, and maritime continent dry.
Erin, can I
Yeah.
interrupt to ask about this? So I had thought that the signal to Southern Africa was exceptionally strong and clear because its rainy season does begin really in December. People will plant then and then,
Mm-hmm.
have crops grow through April, May. And so this particular product doesn't forecast past December.
So the way these are usually issued is that in June, we will issue, or we, haha, these people issue, I did not make these forecasts. These people will issue one, two, three, four forecasts ahead. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in June, it goes as far out as December. Um, in July, you'll see a new one for November, December, January come out. Does that make sense? So this is
Yes.
about as far out as they feel comfortable, because often, you don't want to be issuing forecasts farther out than you have signal. This particular year, frankly, it seems like we have a lot of confidence. Like often, if you look at the 6 month out forecast, you're going to see a lot of white where like the models aren't very confident. This year, they're very confident because this event is happening and they can see it. So
Yeah.
that's partially why this is like this. And you're going to see as the season approaches, you're going to see a lot more confident season focused forecasts for Southern Africa.
Got it. And the forecasts have to be for the entire world. You can't do pinpoint forecasts for subregions like Southern Africa because Southern Africa is connected to every place else. So you have to do everything all at once.
No, you don't. So you can do statistical forecasts, for example, for any geography that basically just associates the sea surface temperatures, like they associate what's happening in the Pacific with rainfall in that geography. So that is one approach, and those models are included in here actually, statistical models. The dynamical ones that move the clouds around and truly try to represent the Earth, those really are run globally. I mean, you can run regional versions of those, but for the
Mm.
seasonal forecasting, that's not really typical. Um, and then there are efforts that try to downscale, like they'll take what has been done globally and then try to improve it, and downscale locally. Those tend not to make a big difference. They don't tend to like add a lot of skill, but there are methods that can do that. Yeah.
Mm.
And I can show you a little bit there. I have another product here I can show you in a sec, and we can talk about Southern Africa again, but that one's maybe the farthest out. I would say East Africa is coming up sooner, that signal, and certainly the Sahel right now. So those have more confidence and people are paying a lot of attention there. Here's an example. This isn't a forecast at all, but these are, correlations. And so here you can see just the correlation between between El Nino happening and it being wet in East Africa and dry in Southern Africa is really quite high. There, is a very strong link when it comes to climate forecasting. However, of course, I think everyone in Southern Africa will remember the 97, 98 El Nino, where it was one of our, super bullish, very strong forecasts. and that didn't pan out. We didn't have drought in Southern Africa. And that was, so it's important to remember that these are not certain. This is not a guarantee. So here are some analogs. So, okay, next question is, well, what does this mean for food supply? So here are some analogs. I'm pulling these slides from a FuseNet presentation. This is another place I would suggest people might want to look. FuseNet makes really detailed presentations that they put out every month. They make a new one, and it's, they go into depth about food security and forecasting in a lot of regions of the world. So they have and they post their slides online. So it's like 100 and something slides of in-depth maps and charts. And so if you are interested, I would recommend them also as a useful source to follow in the coming months. I pulled out some of what I thought were their most interesting plots from their latest presentation. So this one just looks at, so in East Africa, one of the rainy seasons is October, November, December. This tends to be the short rainy season in a lot of East African bimodal areas. And so they basically have just said, well, what could we expect for sorghum and maize yields in a wet year, right? And so what they've looked at are some analogs of past wet years and basically said, what does that tend to do for yield? So here's sorghum and here's maize. So you can see that from their estimates that they're expecting that it should be a good harvest. Basically, if you get more rain, these regions tend to respond positively. We tend to see good harvests, but that's not always true. You can see there were some years here where there was a lot of rain and not a great harvest. So I think it's important to think about, well, what happened in those years? I don't actually know why, but how do we make sure that we're avoiding pests, diseases, flooding, et cetera? But East Africa could be set up for a bumper harvest. And part of then the question right now is, how do you be prepared for a bumper harvest? Are you ready to harvest it? Can you store it? So there was a bumper, same kind of thing, El Niño year a number of years ago, more than 10 years ago. Good forecast, El Niño year, people produced a lot of maize in Kenya. And then there was problems with aflatoxin because people didn't have the storage and preparation ready to store that bumper harvest. And so then actually some of it was not able to be consumed, which was really, really terrible. So one of the questions right now is, if you're in East Africa, one, you should be thinking about, of course, flood risk and what happens if there's too much water, but then also if there is a good year, how can we capitalize on that? And what could that look like? A couple things to think about would be flash flooding. I just put in, this is their slide about flash flooding. I just think that would be important for everyone in East Africa to be considering, of course, because if you get a really heavy rainfall dump, and we have seen more of those in recent years in East Africa, to be ready for flash flooding, especially in urban areas. And then the other point here, they do have a lot of context on South Sudan that I'm not going to go into in this discussion, but the good news is that they are not expecting the seasonal flooding in the wetlands in South Sudan to be as record-breaking as it has been in recent years. Yeah, but certainly above previous norms. For those of you who are working in South Sudan or following this, we have seen really record flooding levels in the last few years that have just might be a new normal. Okay, in the Sahel, we have a kind of inconsistent signal. So this is the forecast that I think, or similar to the forecast that I showed you before, same product. This is the European set of models. They are showing a drier signal in the Sahel, which is consistent with El Nino events. So you can see here that, there is a chance of dryness in the Sahel. This is coming up basically now, would be when people would be worried about this. But it's not a very consistent or very strong forecast. So, do with that what you will. I think it could be useful information for people to manage risk, but also maybe don't take it too strongly. Okay, so in Southern Africa, what I wanted to show you just for context is what has recently happened, because we recently wrapped up last year's rainy season and harvest. So this is, again, these are the FuseNet slides. You can see here, Southern Africa actually had a really good rainfall in the last season. with the exception of southern Madagascar. So this would be a place to watch and maybe worry about. And so the outlooks for maize yield from the last year are actually quite positive in a lot of parts of southern Africa. And here are some of the estimates from South Africa and Zimbabwe. This is just context to say that a lot of places are coming off of a good year when it comes to maize production in Southern Africa. And hopefully that regional supply might be good if we're going into a year that is not going to be as good. So here's the outlook for sort of end of the year for Southern Africa. And these are again mostly not our true forecasts yet because we're not close enough to the season, but these are just sort of historical analogs to say during past El Niños, what's the pattern that we tend to see in Southern Africa, and this is what it tends to look like. So this is what people are really, people in Southern Africa are definitely already worried about drought. I showed you the headlines, the Godzilla over the drought. That was a South African paper. This is certainly on people's minds. And what I will say is we did a paper at one point that looked at not, of course we know that yields are related to El Nino events, but what we were able to also show here is if you look at planted area, people are also responding to El Nino forecasts by planting less. And we could start to see this in the data, especially for years that start out dry. If the year starts out kind of wet, people will plant. But if the year starts out dry and there's a forecast of a neutral year or specifically an El Nino year, people plant less in these parts of Southern Africa where we were able to study. They had data, Lesotho and parts of South Africa. So this is also something to think about when it comes to maize or whatever, when it comes to food production and supply, is that if people think that it's not going to be a productive year, they might not put marginal fields into cultivation. They might, if they have other options, they might do their other options instead. It might not seem like it's worth investing in a lot of farming, which can also then decrease food supply or food, if you're planting less, you for sure will not produce as much as if you plant more. And then of course, if the drought pans out to be really terrible, that on top of the planting less would be an important signal here. So I think that's also not discussed as much, but would be worth talking about in the region. Okay, so I wanted to leave you with 3 discussion points, and then we could talk more about the science or the agriculture side of things. Number 1 would be for those of us who work in weather, for us, you could have a drought in a regular year, right? You can have droughts. Droughts can just happen. But El Nino lets us predict drought. And so for those of us working in weather, I think for us, this seems like a huge opportunity, right? We know what's likely to happen this year. We have a sense of what is coming. And so because we have this information, this drought is not, if a drought happens in Southern Africa, for example, it will not be a surprise. We have the opportunity to make sure that this drought does not turn into a disaster. And I think the onus is really on us to say, if this is an El Nino year, this could be an opportunity to avoid suffering. This could be an opportunity to actually do a lot of actions so that then the drought doesn't turn into something really awful. So I think the big question to our community is, could we make it so that El Nino, good forecast years are the years where we actually have the most success? Second point that we've been talking about a lot is that it's really hard to forecast what's going to happen this year in terms of societal impacts from El Nino because the world is in a kind of funny state, right? Food prices are changing rapidly. We're seeing high inflation around the world. We're seeing the oil, the energy, what is happening in terms of trade, in terms of access to energy globally is very different this year than other years. And so many of us who work in the humanitarian space are a little bit worried about if you have a drought or a flood on top of all these other pressures, what could happen this year that we might not have seen in previous years? So this is also a bit of a thought experiment question to say, do we need to be more imaginative in anticipating consequences and trying to prevent those consequences this year. And I don't know if many of you have thoughts or ideas on that. And then relating to this, then my third point is, if we are imaginative and we look at previous years, what happened in previous El Nino years, what could be different this year? Are we ready? And so one thing we've been encouraging people to do is to try to do scenario planning and say, if this happens, what are we ready? If we have low production, do we have the strategic grain reserves? If the cost of fuel goes up further, are we ready? What would happen? What would happen? What would happen? And play through these scenarios to try to make sure that we're putting in place the right preparations and yeah, try to be as prepared as we can for what could happen later this year. Okay, I'd love to move into discussion and hear your thoughts and questions.
And it seems like we do have people on the call with quite a bit of experience. Yeah,
Great.
really keen to hear.
Yeah. Oh, and Jackie, you were at IRI. Yes, that's great. You can see I used a lot of IRI's figures.
Yes, I did recognize those.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question if no one else wants to start.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if people have sort of started to switch crops or varieties of crops in order to prepare for, depending on where you are, either drought or flood, to switch to more tolerant crops?
In most of the seasonal forecasts that people put out, they'll put an agronomic or whatever, an agricultural advisory that will tell people like, oh, plant drought resistant crops or plant whatever. And that study, I showed you some box plots from a study. We tried to see, could we detect a change in crops? Could we detect that people are planting more sorghum and less maize in El Nino years in Southern Africa, for example? And we basically couldn't detect a change. So it could be that people are doing it. It could be we were not looking at varieties. It could be that they're switching varieties, which I think might be the easier switch. I don't know. Certainly, we were unable to detect like mass change from one crop to the other, which if you think about it, might be a lot more work. Like if you're a farmer and you normally farm maize, switching to another crop could be a really big ask, right? You might need different machinery, different expertise, and that might just not seem like a good idea. But it could be that some people might be doing that. But it could also be that people are switching varieties. And I do think seed providers do pay attention to these forecasts and are paying attention to what the demand might look like and what they might want to sell. And again, interestingly, I think there's been a lot of hope for discussion with seed companies and the private sector who provide ag inputs. But again, I don't think there's a lot of data on really who's doing what. So this would be really interesting for your network to try to figure out how much are the forecasters working with seed companies. Obviously, fertilizer right now is very expensive, which affects everything. Certainly, in a drought year, fertilizer doesn't always help you very much. But if you're trying to get a bumper harvest in East Africa and you want a lot of fertilizer, but it's very expensive, that is also going to be hard. So how does the private sector interact with these forecasts and demand is an area that I think is understudied and would be really important to try to work on.
Really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Pulasti is on from Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm.
And Edward, I think your sort of experience spans a number of different African countries. Jackie, I'm not sure what geographies you've kind of worked with, but Edward, I'm really curious just about the places where you've been working. You might also talk a little bit about soils and
Yeah, thanks, Will. I mean, you're right. Most of my experience has been well, I guess Eastern Southern Africa, but also in the Horn of Africa a bit as well. And I think, I mean, one of the things I'd be interested in your thoughts on, Erin, is about the effects that El Nino events can have on like dry periods within the early growing season. So I was living in Ethiopia during a very intense El Nino back in 2010. And the big problem that farmers faced there was that they planted once when the rains initially came. Then there was a month without rain. They planted again. The same thing happened. By the time the rains eventually came, kind of 3 months late, and they were short as well. They had no seed left. So
Mm,
I'm wondering, like, some of those dynamics, like what can and can't you predict with long range forecasts about kind
mhm,
of, okay, rains are coming, there's maybe you're going to say the period is going to be drier than average. Can you also say anything about, like, whether it's coming in short bursts of rain and whether you might have these like protracted dry periods at key stages of the cropping calendar?
mhm.
Is there anything like, how does that come through in forecasts? Is there anything you can tell about that? Or is it all based maybe on kind of past El Nino experience and what tends to happen?
Yeah, there have been a number of papers trying to answer this or whatever research projects trying to answer this, and often they come up short. So it's a lot easier for us to predict the total rainfall in the season than for us to predict like whether or not there'll be a lot of dry periods. It's not like there's not no information on this, but it's not very strong. The forecasts of like dry periods within the season. However, I do think there's been a lot of good research coming out lately on rainfall onset. So trying to figure out like truly when is the onset? Is
Mm.
this is this it, or is this going to be followed by a dry period soon? Um, and so there's a new collabor. There are a lot of new collaborations, and I know Ethiopia Met Agency is working with something called Aim for Scale, which is funded by a number of people, including Gates Foundation, and they're working with Google and a few others on machine learning forecasts for seasonal onset. So what they want to try to do is give better forecasts of when to plant to farmers, like saying this is not the true onset or whatever. This is unlikely to be the true onset. And they did a big scale out of this in India last year, where they did text messages to a lot of farmers with these onset forecasts.
Mm.
So I'm hoping um, that will continue to scale in lots of places. Certainly, Ethiopia is definitely working on this already, but it's something that the ag sector I think can also demand. So part of it is that the forecasters are very excited to forecast things that have skill but I think it is also very important for the sectors to say we need this. This is the most important thing. Like you need to research this. This is what we want you to forecast, because that's actionable for us.
Yeah, and I guess related to that, like how much potential do you see in some of these very affected El Nino affected parts of the world to utilize like crop insurance approaches so that you're kind of, yeah, obviously like protecting against these
Yeah.
really variable weather patterns and um yeah, kind of, I guess the insurance companies themselves, whether they're state backed or private, using these kind of data sources, farmers using these data sources, deciding what type of insurance to sign up to, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes. So I think it's hugely important. Insurance is a big part of the story. If you're a farmer and you don't have insurance, you need to try to do something that you're really certain is going to yield every year. You have to do sort of the minimum viable product, right? Because otherwise you'll have a year without income. If you have insurance, you can take bigger risks. You can say, I'm going to try to maximize my yield this year. And if it fails, I understand and I'll get paid anyway. So insurance is really important for enabling higher yields in farming because it allows farmers to, buy more expensive inputs um, and so there have been some great studies showing this. IRI has done work on this with microinsurance and farming. There are some really important products. So ARC, Africa Risk Capacity, is a national insurance product in Africa. So governments, it's a sovereign insurance. So the government will take out this um, insurance. And then actually ARC looks at not just the total rain, but looks at how it happened over the season and said, yeah, this is the kind of rain that was likely to, ruined all the crops in your country or whatever. They have very sophisticated modeling. I'm dumbing it down here a little bit, but they have sophisticated crop modeling, and they'll say, yes, you get a payout because you are likely to have a major crop failure in your country. And then the government gets the payout, and then the government can go support its people. So Africa risk capacity, I think, is a very important mechanism. They have also experimented recently with forecast-based insurance that will pay out earlier. So the question is, if you could get the payout now, if you're in Southern Africa and you're like, I don't think farming is going to be viable for me right now, if you could get a payout, what could you do to then try to make sure you do have income this year, or you are able to switch crops and plant something that would yield. So there are some questions about, can we get insurance to pay out earlier to enable forecast-based action? And then there actually have been also some experiments with forecast-based insurance where that's like for private people to buy, and they'll get the payout earlier. I think that only really works if you can take a very lucrative action with that extra time, right? You're not going to need the forecast-based insurance if you can't use the money early. Otherwise, like, why take the basis risk? Instead, just wait until the season fails. But that's the theory.
It's really interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When one goes over to the question of actions and reactions to forecasts, you're going into economics, and we do know a lot about insurance markets and how they work in various settings, and what's insurable, what's not insurable, and why. So Pulasti, I don't know if you have thoughts from a Sri Lankan perspective in the eye of a lot of storms.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nola knows a lot because she worked with one of my colleagues on, what happened in Sri Lanka. But I think, I think you may know this already, but Sri Lanka has, two main seasons basically based on, the northeast monsoon and the south, in the southwest monsoon, basically. The cropping patterns are there. I mean, I'm not a climate expert, but my concern is more about, the government support, or if that is needed in countries. So, I mean, because there's been a lot of reports on Sri Lanka, especially in the media, but I wouldn't say I haven't seen like an official indication of how it's gonna affect. I think that I got that from, I know you didn't focus on Sri Lanka, but I think I got that from your slides, and what I have seen, because some of the discussions that have come up is, do we need to provide assistance in terms of because I do work, a little bit of work in social protection. Do we need to get into that area? Do we need to get to the fertilizers? We don't even have fertilizers. I think the stocks are down. But from what I've seen, I mean, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've seen, it seems like at least Sri Lanka doesn't seem to be like there's a huge change in the usual rain patterns there. No, I mean, because usually farmers for the Maha season, which is the one that's usually starts in October, that's a major cropping season. They start planting around end of September, and I was just wondering, because to make use of like the initial rainfall patterns, but I don't see that there has been a big change for Sri Lanka in this case, or at least the impact.
It looks like the teleconnections, I'm not as familiar with Sri Lanka, but it looks like the teleconnections are actually for some wet during the beginning of the rainy season. And if you look here at the forecasts, there is a little wet signal here for August, September, October. So, and here it is. Okay, no, if you look at September, October, November, it's actually a lot more confident.
Usually expected, yeah.
Yeah. So, I haven't followed it as closely there, but it does seem like there is some signal, and maybe people could use that information to
yeah, I mean, I think that would be very useful if there's some sort of information on that, because I don't think the government, as of now, I think they don't necessarily know what to do in terms of the action. And I think it's a bit concerning given that, we don't really have the finances to get the fertilizer in if it's needed.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, just I don't think we should jump the gun and start giving out social protection just because of something like this. But the country's been through kind of a tough time, so not really sure where this kind of comes in. The whole the big picture.
Right, right. I mean, it could be, I know there have been major flood events in recent years. It could be important to think about flooding, but then, maybe this is a good sign in terms of sufficient rainfall for growing.
Yeah, we have definitely had plenty of rainfall.
Yeah,
But
yeah, right. Or maybe too much.
yeah, this is
I mean,
probably
that's the
the
hard part is like this balance between enough and too much.
yeah, the argument is probably, I think we just can't predict it anymore. I think the usual predictions on the two seasons, and those have gone out the window, and we're not no longer able to predict, when we are going to get rain, and with farmers, you can send them messages, but they still rely on their traditional knowledge.
Mm,
So, you know, if there are changes happening in these patterns, they are going to be the ones that are likely. I mean, of course, the country from a nutrition perspective too, and given all the other issues.
right.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there's some information on South Asia and Sri Lanka.
Right. Well, and relying on traditional knowledge might not be, it could be very useful. There have been some people who've hypothesized about different ways that traditional knowledge is actually picking up on some of these signals, right? So traditional knowledge is built on relationships that people have seen between something happening and something else happening over many, many, many generations. Um, so, for example, there is an anthropologist who has hypothesized that in Peru, people use the stars to forecast rainfall, and he his hypothesis is that actually the visibility of stars is affected by the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, and so during El Nino years, that actually might be a really reasonable way of understanding what's happening, like whether or not El Nino is happening, and forecasting the rain. So it could be that traditional sources are very valuable. What I would say though is I think we do have a lot of meteorological skill with our models and that kind of meteorological science that I hope people are accessing, and would be good to check what kind of guidance is being given, and is that getting out to people?
I think it'll be great if there's a way for us to maybe take this forward to the relevant authorities who can, take action if necessary. I mean, I think that's sort of kind of a missing link when it comes to these things in Sri Lanka. At least I'm just talking mostly from Sri Lanka's context, but
Sure.
yeah.
Yep. Yep. And I can look and see what the guidance looks like in that region.
So Jackie or others might have, additional questions. We have about 10 minutes to the hour. One question, Aaron, is where El Nino is such a great example of forecasting that has both improvements and worsenings in both rich and poor countries, and the degree to which we might be moving towards a world in which we're able to simply do forecasts and not be so focused on forecasting bad things to target aid in the poorest places, which of course is very important, but also in low and middle income countries, upper middle income countries, and high income countries, simply improving the ability to forecast production changes based on not only the agroclimatic conditions, but also the simple weighted average of exposure relative to in a Bayesian sense, what had you previously expected, and then what's the update. And in the United States, we do this. We have used sort of the most advanced meteorology in the world in the 50s and 60s to construct steadily updated maps of production that were immediately taken up by fertilizer dealerships, to pre-position their fertilizer for the better season, and the seed companies to move so that was always just normal business, both with the extreme droughts where you would just expect no planting at all as those forecasts rolled in, and the extreme floods where people were anticipating a crisis of drainage, and so they would increase their drainage investments. So the idea of symmetry between good and bad, the idea of universality between the poorest and the richest, all being forecasted with the same integrated toolkit. Is that something that you see people talking about and thinking about? Because we're all in this together. might be a helpful framing.
Yeah. I mean, certainly seasonal, El Nino has its strongest impacts in the tropics. So it's an example of, for example, we live in Massachusetts. There's no information really coming out of El Nino for Massachusetts. Like it's like maybe you can find some small associations, but it's not giving us much of it, any sort of indication of what our weather would look like this year. So, I think seasonal forecasts are an interesting example of like, yeah, globally integrated and like, where is the signal? What can we know? Where can we know it? And that doesn't follow rich and poor boundaries. Um, like our best forecasts are not necessarily in wealthy countries. That said, in terms of integrated understanding of like, what would that mean for agriculture and food? I think what's hard there is that we really, the, I mean, as a climate person, the ag and food world is so complicated and messy, and like there are so many actors making all sorts of decisions. And like that aflatoxin example, like the idea of having a bumper harvest and then actually gets ruined by aflatoxin. Just I remember being so shocked when I first learned this years ago. There are so many variables. Like what is the private sector doing? How expensive is fertilizer, right? Um, who can buy what kind of seeds? So I think it is hard to forecast outcomes, to be honest. And people try, but I think we could do more and better in that space. I would love to see more impact-based forecasting, more like tailored agricultural advisories that say, for this crop in this place, here's what this means. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, and because actors take account of the forecast, so you forecast lower yields, people plant less,
right?
If they believe it, and therefore there's less impact.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But this is a great conversation. I think one interesting question is, should we have another one? Should this A&H research community plan on an update? And that gets to the question of what is the, in a Bayesian sense, how much more do you learn as the El Nino progresses? So maybe we could just conclude with that. How much is El Nino forecasting something that when you make your July and August forecasts, the updates are increasingly accurate, not just for October, November, December, which of course they're going to be increasingly accurate for that, but they become more precise for the out months as well. Just give us a sense, of when will we know more about this year?
Yeah. I don't expect surprises, let's say it this way. So I don't expect that if we wait 3 months, all of a sudden we're going to get a forecast that says Southern Africa is going to be wet. Just given what they look for, like given what El Nino normally does, and given what the forecasts look like right now, it looks pretty consistent. So I think you do get more information over time. You get more confidence over time. But right now, because this event has been so big and so obvious, I don't expect a major change of course. Other years that can be true. Like we can be sitting in June and be like, I don't know, is this going to be a La Nina or not? We got to wait a couple months to see. This year, I feel like there has been a lot of, like seeing the forecasts with those dark colors that I just showed you this early in the year is actually quite unusual. Forecasts are not usually quite so confident at this early. And so the point of that story would just be, I think what we're going to see is more tailored guidance as we get closer to seasons starting for specific places and what that looks like. So like ACMAT is, the Africa COP is happening right now. COF, Climate Outlook Forum is happening right now, and we're going to see other regional climate outlook forums. I think you're going to start to see more tailored guidance, like, okay, in this place, and you'll start to see onset forecasts, like more interesting forecasts be produced. So maybe those would be like right before these seasons start would be another moment to check in with certain regions, and if there are certain places. But then and at that point, it might be interesting to have an agricultural person also comment on like what people are saying, and then what's available, like all these other economic questions, like what's available in the country. Is there a shortage of fertilizer? What are farmers doing? what's word on the street? Are we getting like this like groupthink Godzilla El Nino scare happening or not? That would be interesting to follow.
Excellent. Yeah. So Nola, we'll keep an eye on how to schedule that and who to bring in. But this has been a really great session. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Erin.
No problem.
And Jackie, appreciate you sharing really bad news about IRI and the data library. Pulasti for sharing from Sri Lanka. And Edward also. Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. We organized this at short notice and it was worth it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you guys. I'm always happy to talk about El Nino. I think it's fascinating.
Mm.
I'll see you soon, Will.
All right.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, everyone.
Take care.